So I'm going to be kind of talking from almost the geographic center of North America. There is some debate in North Dakota of where that is. Some people think it's in center North Dakota, or other people think it's in Robinson. No relation. So I'm going to be talking about Fort Rice, which is right here in south central North Dakota. So here's Bismarck, the state capital, and it's on the just west side of the river. This map here shows some of the battles that were conducted in the area during the late 1800s, including the Battle of Little Bighorn, which I will kind of talk about later. So just to kind of give a kind of an overview, due to rising tensions with various Native American nations across the Northern Plains, and to keep the road open to the west, the US government ordered the construction of new military forts. Fort Rice was the first fort in a series constructed along the Missouri. Fort Rice is second in age in this period to Fort Abercrombie, which is here in the southeast corner of the state. The oldest fort in the state is Fort Mandan, which is right about here, constructed by Lewis and Clark in 1804, 1805, and there's a great reconstruction just off the highway there. So Fort Rice, on July 7th, 1864, General Soley established Fort Rice on the west shore of the Missouri River. The fort is named in honor of Union Civil War hero, Brigadier General James Clay Rice. General Rice had risen quickly through the ranks after distinguishing himself at the first and second battles of Bull Run and defending Little Round Top at the Battle of Gettysburg. He died on May 10th, 1864 during the Battle of Spotsylvania, Virginia. So the fort is named in honor of him. Fort Rice was constructed by the 30th Wisconsin Volunteers under the command of Colonel Daniel J. Dill. The palisades were erected with local cottonwood timber, which if anyone's been to the Northern Plains, there aren't a lot of trees. So that kind of created kind of an issue, but luckily they did build it along the river and there are still some trees kind of in the area. So the fort, the original fort, 1864, had officers' quarters, a guardhouse, a storehouse, a hospital, a bakehouse, a library, a magazine, blockhouses, outhouses, and even a sundial. Then outside the palisades, I had a larger complex, including a blacksmith shop to the south, a cemetery, corrals, and a trading post. The Wisconsin troops were relieved in October of 1864 by the 1st U.S. Volunteers. The 1st U.S. Volunteers, or galvanized Yankees, were comprised of Confederate prisoners of war, refugees, or deserters who could not or would not return to the South to fight against the Confederacy. So you have people who are all from the South. What do? They come to the Great Plains. So getting up here proved to be very difficult and deadly. The river boats left, they traveled from the east, went to St. Louis, hopped on a river boats, and came up the Missouri in the fall of 1864. Well, the ferry had a human cargo of 600. It was designed to carry 100. So they didn't get very far. They got about south central South Dakota, which meant that they had to march 270 miles upriver. They survived on crackers, coffee, sugar, and once every 4 days, pork. Didn't get much better when they arrived at the fort because, well, it's winter in North Dakota. So it got down to 30, 40 below zero. So life was not easy to be isolated by distance, and especially on an ice-blocked river, which meant that it was difficult to get things such as vegetables. So the fort lacked the ability to store vegetables, which as a result, scurvy grew rampant. Yes, that's scurvy, not just pirates. So diseases also from poor sanitation, dysentery, and cholera. So that first year, not even the first year, just that winter, 81 men died, 37 from scurvy, 24 from chronic diarrhea, 3 from typhoid, 10 from other diseases, and 7 killed in combat with natives. To pass the time during the first winters, the soldiers opened a theater, and they also published their own weekly newspaper called the Frontier Scout, which here is one of the, actually 2 of the papers, which started off with a poem by one of the officers and kind of details the soldiers that were there, what life was like. The one on the right here talks about sanitary. So they are a great primary source for this era. So the newspaper was kind of made to dispel the roteness of the Post. Also, a home-like atmosphere was created by 21-year-old Elizabeth Cardwell, the wife of Private Patrick Cardwell, the only female to originally arrive at the site, and she accompanied the regiment the 270-mile march while pregnant. So she was held in the highest esteem and became a mother figure to the regiment. They were at the fort until they were mustered on November 27th, 1865. And so they were there for about 13 months. During that time, under the second colonel of the 1st U.S. Volunteers, Colonel Dimmons, created conflicts with Native peoples, became tense with numerous skirmishes, and there were conflicting accounts of how many deaths on soldiers and the natives. As I mentioned, at least 7 died on the U.S. volunteer side. The tensions rose to a near breaking point in the fall of 1865 when 500 Lakotas, Cheyennes, and Upper Yanktons attacked the fort. The first volunteers happened to be conducting drills with the cannons, and therefore the battle didn't last very long and the warriors were pushed back. A company of mounted infantry, which I will get to later as they did have cavalry there, chased the freeing warriors 10 miles to the north. Tensions did begin to ease with a change in leadership and with the muster of the first volunteers, and then also with a treaty in 1868 and then a fort expansion the same year.
Andrew,
yeah.
Sometimes we hear a clicking noise, so I don't know if it's something on your end or don't know, but I thought I'd mention it as I know some people are gonna catch up on the recording.
Sure, it's probably my microphone.
Oh, okay. We'll just do a little dancing move to the pops.
Yeah, there we go. Is that better? Is it still doing it?
That is better. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was probably the microphone earpiece rubbing on my shirt as I was talking. So the second treaty of Fort Laramie was signed at Fort Rice, which replaced the original 1851 treaty, which I'll talk to a little bit later, kind of is contested up here. This second treaty established the Great Sioux Reservation in portions of North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, and South Dakota, including the Black Hills. The Lakota signed the treaty at Fort Rice, but Sitting Bull was not there. He sent another in his place. This treaty is important to the Sioux people, and to this day, this treaty has caused tensions and issues between the tribes, such as the Crow, who claim early ancestry to the Black Hills, increasing homesteaders in the area, the US military, and of course the government who wanted more land. So this slide, I was able to take a trip down to Standing Rock a couple weeks ago. And so the image on the left is the Standing Rock, the symbol of the Standing Rock Nation. There is, so technically Sitting Bull has 2 burial places. The one on the left here is in Fort Yates, and this is where he was originally buried. And this one on the right is his reinterment in 1953 at the request of his grandchildren. Now there is debate, and to this day, of where is he actually buried? Is he in the 1953 or is he still in the original location? Some people think whichever one, so they don't actually know where he is truly buried. So that's a little interesting information regarding Sitting Bull. So in 1868, the fort was expanded to cover an area of 864 feet by 554 feet. It was protected by a 10-foot high log stockade on 3 sides, with the open on the Missouri on the east side. The stockade included the parade grounds with 4 company barracks, kitchens, 7 officers' quarters, a hospital, bakery, storehouse, library, and powder magazine. And then outside the east line of the buildings towards the river was a guardhouse and the post headquarters. This is it's a layout of it. So these are all the officers and quarters. You see the parade grounds, and then the river would be over here, with the guardhouse would have been somewhere over here. And then there's a cemetery down here for the original troops. So inside the fort, we actually have a couple of good photos of what it looked like after the expansion in roughly 1871, 1870. And this is a drawing of what the fort would have looked like by Linda Slaughter, who I'm going to talk about next, is an important figure in the area. So although the fort was designed for 4 companies of infantry, it was later to accommodate several companies of the 7th U.S. Cavalry. Yes, that 7th Cavalry, led by Custer. So the average garrison was 235 men, reached a high of 357 in 1774, and a low in 1874, and then a low in 1878. 4 companies of the Fort Rice contingents of the 7th Cavalry accompanied Lieutenant Colonel Custer on his Black Hills expedition in 1874, and 2 companies from Fort Rice fought at the Battle of Little Bighorn. So during the 1870s, Fort Rice expanded yet again, and at this point became a very vital point for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Yellowstone expedition. Those expeditions accompanied surveyors and parties for the expansion of the Northern Pacific Railroad. Pictured here is Captain George Hill. He was a commander of the fort in 1869, and this is his little son here pictured in 1868. In addition, after the fort was abandoned in 1878, some soldiers stuck around, including Michael Cadwell. He was a sergeant in the 7th Cavalry, not to go to Little Bighorn, but he helped to develop the town of Fort Rice, just north of this fort location. So, Linda Slaughter is an author and important pioneer in women's rights, and she lived at Fort Rice from 1871 to 1882. She met her husband, an Army surgeon, in 1868, and they were transferred to Fort Rice in 1871. Slaughter was an active writer and kept detailed journals, details of life at Fort Rice. She wrote an entry in the Fortress to Farm serial, which is a very interesting firsthand account of this whole area. In one event, she described that 20 men attempted to ford the river from the east bank going to the west bank where the fort is at. Unfortunately, the river got the best of them and all 20 of them died, and most of the bodies were never found. So after leaving Fort Rice, she started the first Sunday school in Bismarck. She also founded the first historical society in Bismarck and became Bismarck's first postmistress. In the 1890s, she became influential in Washington, D.C. While in D.C., she became friends with Susan B. Anthony and became the first woman to vote at a national convention. In addition, she is the great-great-grandmother of the state of North Dakota's current governor, Doug Burgum. So, as I mentioned before, the post was abandoned on November 25th, 1878, after the establishment of the Fort Yates on the Standing Rock Agency, which is about 25 miles south of Fort Rice. After abandonment, the land was sold and became a private ranch, primarily for cattle. Picture of cows on mustard. This is not from the Fort Rice area. Then in 1910, a portion of the site was sold to the Northern Pacific Railroad. Good or bad, the railroad avoided most of the 1868 structural features, but if there would have been anything remaining of the original 1864 soldiers' quarters, they likely would have been destroyed. And you can kind of see here, this is the railroad bed bisecting the site with the soldier 1868 officer quarters right here. So the tracks were removed and the railroad was abandoned in 1966. Let's see here. In 1913, the 1864 area footprint, you can kind of see here, was sold or donated to the state of North Dakota and became what is now the state historic sites. The remaining portions remained private until being transferred to the Army Corps in the 1950s and 60s. So while the state designation and surrounding federal property implies preservation, the site has undergone multiple transformations, primarily from the encroaching prairie dog town and the continual erosion of the adjacent Missouri River. In 1936, two Fort Rice blockhouses were reconstructed, but unfortunately were destroyed in 1977. You can see the two blockhouses, one here and one here in this 1957 aerial. And here's the remnants of that blockhouse platform. During the 1940s, corner markers, you can kind of see here were placed across the site by the WPA, and many of these are still here, but they're kind of starting to crumble, and the state is working to fix those as well as the signs. So currently, it is three-faceted. First is the county highway with a county campground right here. Here's the historic site. You can see the blockhouse platforms here. And then this is all Army Corps property here. And this is private ownership with a current cemetery, and the original cemetery would have been here, but that cemetery was removed in the 1880s, and all of the soldier burials were moved to the Custer's Hill at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and all of the non-soldiers, so their wives and families, were transported over to this cemetery. There is still the potential, no archaeology has been done, and there is potential for buried unmarked graves in that area. In addition, you can kind of see down here that it is a park and people do walk around and collect stuff. So every time I go out there and visit, there's always new stuff up on this marker. And then most recently, a county endeavor that started in about 2019, they created what's known as the Rough Rider Trail. It begins here at Fort Rice. So you can kind of see, and it follows the old railroad. It travels about 16 miles up the highway. And this is used by ATVs, horses, pedestrians. It's kind of just a way to get outdoor. And in the wintertime, it's used by snowmobiles. So it's kind of a great way to get people interested in the area. Just kind of leading into the next slide, right here is the Standing Rock Reservation boundary. And so it's about 8 miles from Fort Rice. So a different kind of fort. I don't know if many of you remember this from a few years back, but the contested Dakota Access Oil Pipeline, which was slated to be constructed under the Missouri River, about 6 miles south of Fort Rice, just north of Standing Rock Reservation. To go back a slide, roughly right about there. So in see here. Other portions were constructed in the fall of 2016, and it reached the river in November of 2016. Representatives from Standing Rock and the public began protesting the crossing of the pipeline of the river. They contested that this portion of it, so this area here, fell under that 1851 treaty, the one I kind of talked about before. So this still, to them, was the Standing Rock Reservation and was their land. So the protests increased dramatically in December of 2016 through January of 2017, resulting in a major police and National Guard mobilization, which is here. Whoops. Yeah. So this is Fort Rice and became forward operating base. And this picture was taken from roughly right about here, looking that way. And this image is from early 2018, and you can see the damage that this operating base did during the protests. They estimated that there were upwards of 1,500 to 2,000 police and National Guard volunteers and everything. They could feed up to 2,000 people. So it was quite a operation, you could say, at this area. However, there's no public documentations of the exact extent of the forts, but you gotta love YouTube and Twitter and all of that stuff. And there is video of people driving around and looking, and you can see, can't see quite as well on this map, but this area also was loaded with trash and heavily disturbed. And at one point it was noted that a backhoe came in and scraped off a few inches of topsoil. So if there were remnants of the forts, potentially could have been destroyed because of that. So this is a modern, usage of this area. So now we'll get into the archaeology. So little has been done at Fort Rice. It was recorded on the state in 1976. The NRHP form was started in 1980, but it was unfortunately never completed. In 2005 and 2009, there were surveys along the Missouri River for the Army Corps, and they noted features. 2005 recorded the most amount of features. They found an ice house and other eroding features along the shore, but 4 years later, they were unable to relocate over half of the features. No formal excavation has occurred anywhere on the sites within the state area or the Army Corps. In addition to the fort, I talked about the railroad, but also where the guardhouse and everything to the east between the fort and the river was a Plains era village earth lodge, so roughly 900 to 4,500 AD. So some prehistoric material was observed, but very little, and they kind of think that more than likely that village has probably eroded away. So, okay, so Fort Rice at risk. And if you were at my SHA talk, like Sarah, I used the lovely turbations, which graduate school and all through my professional career, I mostly just used bioturbation as kind of a way to describe everything. But in all of my research and doing stuff for my master's, I discovered that there's a much broader range of turbations more than just bio. So I'm going to kind of talk about aquaturbation, cryoturbation, faunalturbation, and then I've already talked about anthroturbation, the effects and disturbances on soils by humans. you know, in this example would be a Native American plain village, then a US military fort be building on top of it, and then a railroad bisecting that. Typically, the anthrotubation is mining or large construction, but in some regards, you could think that archaeology would also be a form of anthrotubation because everything we do is destructive and can't be repaired. So just some fun little vocabulary lesson for the day. So we will start with the coldest and least fun is cryoturbation, which is essentially the effects of freezing and thawing of soils. This is an official soil taxonomic classification as defined by the USDA NRCS. So anybody who's a big soil nerd and you want to add fun letters to your profile drawings, use the lowercase jj as evidence of cryoturbation. Kind of a quick and dirty of what it is. You can kind of see these cracks here. They're formed when the ground we're coming to a very bad drought in 2021. So you can see just how dry it is. Winter hits, it snows, the snow melts into these cracks. It freezes because it gets cold out here and it creates ice like this. This is my driveway from this year. You can see the ice build up here. Well, that during freeze thaw creates these lovely flame features. This is an excavation I did a few years back in the northwest part of the state. And you can tell these kind of go almost all the way up to the soil. You can kind of see the cracks kind of going off this way. They can be kind of tough sometimes to distinguish between, say, roots or other things, but they have no organics. It's essentially just a spongy, soft type of soil, especially compared to this really dense clay subsoil. So it's kind of a interesting thing. And this is kind of a general issue across the northern plains. Since no archaeology has been done at Fort Rice, we presume this is going on, but we don't know for sure. So then the most fun one that most people are here for are the lovely prairie dogs, which is FAUNALTURBATION. That includes other lovely and scary things such as this rattlesnake that I almost stepped on when I was out there a few years ago. It also can include coyote dens and other, burrowing things, ground squirrels. But for Fort Rice, a major concern is the prairie dogs. As you can kind of see in this one, you might not be able to fully see it, but there is a nail right here. And this is a winter den for the prairie dogs, which I did learn they do hibernate during the winter, and you can see their little seed collection that they built up this past winter. This was taken 2 weeks ago out at Fort Rice. So talking about prairie dogs, this image here is from September of 2019, and you can see all of these lovely little spots is the ever encroaching prairie dog town. And looking at aerial imagery from 1957 all the way up to 2019, it dramatically increased through most of the 20th into the 21st century, but a well-documented event occurred in the spring of 2011 with major Missouri River flooding. Most of the flooding was north of Fort Rice, but there is evidence of flooding. So when I compared 2009 pre-flood and 2011 post-flood, most of this and this, you didn't have prairie dogs. So in the 8 years between 2011 and 2019, they came back and they came back strong. This is all Army Corps property here. It's not heavily managed. It is kind of still used for cattle grazing. And if you know much about cattle grazing, they are great at trampling and making dry areas and conditions, as you kind of see here and here, which prairie dogs love and they flourish. Another thing of note is this area does have the threatened and endangered black-footed ferret. So that is another issue that brings the concern of how to control this increasing prairie dog town from going too much in and destroying the forts. Here is a LiDAR, whoops. Here's a LiDAR scan from 2017, and you can kind of see all of these bumps in here are prairie dog mounds. So you can just see how, and these are all the pits and the leftovers from the fort. Here's the railroad. This was the powder magazine, and this is the guardhouse platform. Can't see it quite as much here, but you can see all of these features. I don't know what they are. I've tried to see what they are, so that would be one thing to explore, is to see what these features are outside of the area. But back to prairie dogs. Here is a bisection of good or bad of the Missouri River that's eroded out, and you can see the holes and the tunnels that the prairie dogs have created. One of the good things about North Dakota is we tend to have shallow soils. So kind of about here would be our occupation, and down here is all clays and subsoil. So looks like most of them are under the occupation, but it still doesn't mean that they aren't doing stuff on the surface. Such as this cute little guy here, all these little holes that you can kind of see across the area. This is actually a coyote den that has eroded out of the Missouri River. And I was playing around with a 3D scanning app on my cell phone and took a 3D scan of this prairie dog. Now, so you can kind of see the 3D version of it. So I thought that was kind of fun. So then kind of lastly, we're going to talk about the river, the kind of major driving force for the Fort Rice at risk. As you know, it's located along the Missouri. And so the eroding shoreline has been creating issues. And so, like I said, there was a survey in 05 and 09. And in the 09, couldn't identify half of the features. I went out and did a survey 2 weeks ago and was unable to relocate any of the features that were identified about 10 years ago. And I have pictures of those in a minute. So I looked at the aerial imagery from 57 all the way up to modern day. And you can see in this one in 57, there were trees. The river channel is here. And so this is kind of the bottomlands, wetlands, and then there was some farmlands, and you can see that there were trees. Fast forward 40 years, that is all gone. There's no trees, there's nothing. Here's kind of another one in May of 07, where you can see the lowlands, because the river does freeze, and so it does kind of create and pull the river away. So you can sometimes go out and see these bottomlands, which I gotta take lots of pictures a couple weeks ago. Whereas say May 2017, which was winter of 16-17, was a harsh winter. And so the river was all the way up to the bank. So even different, same time of year, different years, different exposure. And this is all riprap that's there, but it only went up so high on the hill. Here is an image from last September. You can tell it's a very dry year because you can still see a lot of that lowlands. Here's kind of the riprap. Here's some wetlands here, and then here's where the river would be. Here's what it looked like 2 weeks ago. You can kind of see the lowlands. Here's the edge of kind of the riprap, and then here's the frozen river. Going back to prairie dogs, you can kind of see all of the prairie dog town. Not as much up here. I just think it's the resolution, but it's still very prevalent. So 2 weeks ago, I was able to take a field visit and did some reconnaissance work out at the fort. So go back once, oops, go back once, back slide. So this little tree here is this tree. So I'm looking to the south here. You can kind of see the river, the riprap. So the riprap does not go all the way up to the edge, and you can see everything that is just continually eroding off of the shoreline. And while I was there, this actually came down when I was there. So it's even without the river being, because the river is quite a ways off, it's still eroding away. You can kind of see the full, I'm down on the lowlands here, you can see the full riprap, that kind of shrub and the tree. Here's another picture of the stuff that came off while I was there. I didn't see any artifacts in this area, but I did find a little ways away. I did find butchered bone that was eroding out, and you can still see it sticking out of the wall. And then you can see a lovely prairie dog hole that has appeared. There's another one kind of deep here. So they do dig and burrow pretty deep. And there's another one kind of up here, which is higher, close to the occupation zone. So they do go shallow. And then here's another view looking towards the shoreline. This is about 20, 30 yards off of the shore from the riprap. You can kind of see this area that's completely eroded out, eroded out and sunk in. And then here's a close-up of it with, well, it's March in North Dakota, so there's still some snow there. A few years back, I was able to record, and in 2009, they did note a feature in this area, but coming back here this 2 weeks ago, nothing's there. So it's kind of sad that in 10 years, that much is already eroding away. So kind of looking at the future, what we want to do with Fort Rice is we want to get it registered. That is kind of my main plan right now. A lot of the information from this presentation is used for the nomination. We want to do a geophysical survey. LiDAR and aerial drone has been done, but we want to do some magnetometer, some GPR, just to kind of look at it and, you know, potentially document what is still there and what damage has been caused by the prairie dogs or what they haven't. Obviously want to do some archaeology within the state area, and obviously in the Army Corps. Preservation, this is a tough one. The state kind of punts everything to the Army Corps when it comes to the prairie dogs, because they kind of say it's their issue since they're encroaching into the state land, and the Army Corps says, no, it's your problem because, well, it's yours. And then even though the county owns some, the county just punts everything back to the feds. So little is actually being done regarding the prairie dogs, and the river, nothing is being done about that, as I kind of showed that it is just continually eroding out. This is another fun little thing I took with my phone. That's about a 20-minute quick scan. This is of one of the bunkhouse platforms. And you kind of see some of the outlines in the bricks, and it has a lovely prairie dog burrow right underneath it. But one thing that the state and private entities are doing to kind of broaden the narrative of the state and Fort Rice is called the Talking Trails program. This is a Bismarck-based company. It's a collaboration with private and state entities kind of across this northern region. The Fort Rice, these signs were sponsored by the Northern Plains Heritage, which is a nonprofit organization, which was kind of involved with the Rough Rider Trail I talked before, and some of the other sites in the area. These are kind of fun. They're across the area. You can call in the number, type in the code, and it gives you a fun little history lesson. Most of these are stuff that I kind of already talked about here. You can also go to talkingtrail.com/Fort Rice, and you can listen to the 3 experiences across the area. So I thought that was kind of a neat little thing. And that's it. So thank you very much.